Babysitter accused me of a crime so vile, it destroyed my life. My family disowned me, and I spent 4 years in prison, until the truth finally came out. Now, I'm left to rebuild my world while holding her accountable for the nightmare she caused. It all started when I was 19, a young guy with a simple life, plans for college, and dreams. But all that came crashing down on D-Day. I was accused of a crime so horrific and vile that it still feels surreal. Even worse, my own family believed the lies that ruined me. It was supposed to be a normal evening. A family friend had asked me to babysit their 2 young kids because their usual babysitter, Sarah, 21, had cancelled at the last minute. I can still remember the night. I remember agreeing to help out. The night went off without a hitch. I played games with the kids, cooked them a simple dinner, and put them to bed. I remember feeling proud of myself for handling everything smoothly. It never crossed my mind that the next day would be the start of the most hellish experience of my life. The morning after, everything unraveled. I woke up to the police banging on my front door. Confused and half asleep, I opened it to find officers with grim expressions and a warrant for my arrest. Before I could even process what was happening, I was in handcuffs, being read my rights. My head was spinning. What could I possibly have done? As I was shoved into the back of the police car, I overheard one of the officers mention Sarah's name. My stomach twisted into knots, but I still didn't understand what was going on. At the station, I learned that Sarah had gone to the police, accusing me of sexually assaulting her, and, in an even more despicable claim, of inappropriately touching the children I'd babysat. Hearing those words made me feel physically ill. I was stunned, horrified, and above all, terrified. I knew, and had heard, that being a man and being accused of something like that could ruin you, and it did. My brain was just thinking, how could she make up something so awful? My mind raced with questions, but I had no answers. All I knew was that I was innocent. I tried to explain to the officers, but they looked at me like I was already guilty, like I was the monster Sarah had painted me to be. As news of the accusation spread, my life disintegrated. I grew up in a small town where rumors were currency, and this rumor? It was a tidal wave. People who had known me my entire life turned their backs on me. Friends cut ties, neighbors glared with disgust, and the whispers followed me everywhere. But the worst part was my family. My parents, the people who had raised me, believed Sarah without hesitation. My mom couldn't even look at me, her face etched with shame and disappointment. My dad asked me point blank how I could commit such heinous acts. No matter how many times I insisted on my innocence, they refused to believe me. The betrayal was suffocating. I kept thinking, these are the people who are supposed to know me better than anyone. How could they believe that I was capable of something so horrific? I wanted to scream, to shake them until they understood, but instead, I found myself alone, drowning in accusations that were nothing but lies. I was forced to move out, shunned even by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Then came the trial. I had hoped that the justice system would at least give me a fair chance to defend myself, but I knew, I was a man. The truth was never going to prevail. The courtroom felt rigged from the start. Sarah's testimony was filled with tears and emotional outbursts, and the jury hung on to every word. They looked at me like I was a monster, and it didn't matter what I said or what evidence I had. The court dismissed the ring camera footage from the house, which clearly showed that I never left the premises or interacted with Sarah. My phone location data, which should have proven my innocence, was barely acknowledged. It was as if everyone had already made up their minds. When the guilty verdict came down, my world ended. The judge sentenced me to 4 years in prison, and I remember hearing my mother sob as if she were mourning the death of her son. But she wasn't mourning for me, she was mourning for the illusion of the son she thought she had lost to evil. My own parents wouldn't even look at me as I was led away in handcuffs. That moment is burned into my memory, a knife twisted deep into the heart of everything I once held dear. Prison was a different kind of nightmare. Being an inmate is hard enough, but being an inmate branded as someone who hurt children? It put a target on my back. Every single day, I was beaten, harassed, and isolated to the point where I thought I would lose my mind. I had to stay hyper-aware, always watching my back, never knowing when someone would attack me next. I learned to fight, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. I began working out. I clung to the tiniest slivers of hope, convincing myself that the truth had to come out eventually, that I couldn't lose myself entirely in this hell. Visits from my family were rare, and when they did happen, they were cold, uncomfortable affairs. My parents would sit across from me, eyes full of judgment and disappointment. My siblings barely spoke. It was as if they were visiting a ghost, someone they used to know but now despised. Each visit was a reminder that the people who should have believed in me had given up entirely. It chipped away at what little hope I had left. But then, after 4 years of living a nightmare, everything changed. A new attorney took an interest in my case. He reviewed the evidence that had been ignored and promised me that he would fight to expose the truth. I was skeptical at first. 4 years of constant disappointment had eroded my faith in the justice system, but he was determined, digging into the case with a thoroughness that no one else had bothered to show. I held my breath, trying not to get my hopes up. The process of reopening my case was excruciatingly slow, but at least this time, I had someone who truly believed in me. My new attorney was relentless. He pored over every detail, every piece of evidence that had been ignored or dismissed during my original trial. He was shocked at how poorly my case had been handled, especially when he saw how solid the evidence was, evidence that could exonerate me. The ring camera footage, which had clearly shown that I never left the house or interacted with Sarah, was undeniable. The phone data, which placed me exactly where I said I was irrefutable. How any of this had been brushed aside before was beyond comprehension. As my attorney fought to get the case overturned, I lived in a constant state of anxiety and fear. Each step forward felt like climbing a mountain, and I couldn't shake the fear that the system would fail me again. My mind was a war zone, a place where hope and despair clashed relentlessly. I knew I had to stay strong, but after 4 years of feeling abandoned and vilified, my resilience was hanging by a thread. Even so, I forced myself to keep believing that justice was possible, that this nightmare could finally come to an end. And then, finally, the day arrived. The court had agreed to hear the new evidence. Sitting in that courtroom again, 4 years older but feeling as vulnerable as ever, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything I had lost. My life, my reputation, and my trust in people, all shattered because of one person's lies. Sarah was there, of course, her demeanor noticeably different from the first trial. She didn't have the same confidence she had when she gave her original testimony, and I wondered if she knew the game was finally up. My attorney presented the Ring camera footage and the phone location data to the court. This time, the judge couldn't ignore it. The footage clearly showed that I had never left the house during the time Sarah claimed I assaulted her. The children's testimony, previously coerced under pressure, was re-examined, and experts found glaring inconsistencies that supported my innocence. Piece by piece, the case against me unraveled. Sarah's accusations, once so convincing and damning, fell apart under the scrutiny they should have faced from the beginning. I remember holding my breath as the judge deliberated. My entire body was tense, and I was clutching my hands so hard that my knuckles turned white. When the judge finally spoke, declaring that my conviction was being overturned and all charges were being dropped, I didn't process it at first. It felt unreal, like I was hearing someone else's story, not my own. My attorney turned to me, grinning, and said, "You're free." Tears blurred my vision, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt a sense of relief so overwhelming that it left me trembling. The courtroom was silent. My mother, who had come to witness the hearing, looked stunned. She had spent the last 4 years believing I was a monster, and now, faced with the truth, she seemed paralyzed. I didn't wait to see her reaction. I needed air, needed to feel the sun on my face without the weight of false accusations pressing down on me. As I stepped outside, the light felt warmer, the breeze softer, and the world brighter than I had remembered. But the relief was bittersweet. The 4 years I had lost weren't coming back. The friends who had abandoned me, the family members who had turned their backs, and the life I could have lived were all gone. The emotional toll of being wrongfully imprisoned doesn't vanish the moment you're declared innocent. It lingers, a ghost that haunts you even in freedom.